In today's episode, we're going to talk about the 3 biggest mistakes that people make when it comes to remote working. There are a lot more than 3, but I've narrowed it down to the big 3, and if you just stop doing one of these, it'll accelerate your productivity. Welcome back to my show where high achievers get productive, get promoted, and get the corner office. Make sure to like and subscribe because every Wednesday I release a new episode that helps accelerate your career. In today's episode, you'll discover the 3 big mistakes that people make when working remotely. And turns out there are many to pick from. I myself have worked remotely as an employee and as a business owner, and so I've made plenty of mistakes in both domains. And one of the big mistakes I made early on working remotely is that I worked longer and longer and longer hours. And by the way, research shows us that people who work remotely do work longer hours. They take fewer sick days, they're absent a lot less, they just work more overall, including the weekends. So a lot of these strategies that I'm going to be sharing with you are going to challenge some assumptions like working more equals more productivity, which we know it doesn't necessarily correlate. So let's dig into the 3 big mistakes. The first big mistake is sending more emails to look productive. Yes, we've all fallen into this trap, whether it's a client or a boss or someone else in your organization. Sending more emails when you're working remotely lets people know, hey, I'm still here, I'm still working. But we really know that that is a huge mistake. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're working harder. You ever notice that one person who always responds the quickest to every email? It's amazing. It's like they're on fire. They're just sitting there waiting to boom, boom, boom. Send more emails as quickly as possible to let them know that they're standing by just in case. And while this may be great customer service, it's terrible for effectiveness and productivity, because emailing is a reactive activity in and of its nature, right? You're receiving an email and you're replying to that. Now, if you initiate one, that's a different situation, but a lot of times we spend our day replying quickly, and that is a reactive activity, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're more productive or more effective. It just means you're great at responding to email quickly. So more email doesn't mean more effectiveness. So I challenge you today, so instead of sending more email in your very next email, instead of trying to reply as quickly as possible or answering it really late at night, take a little time to craft it more slowly with intention and make sure that you're adding value. The second big mistake is being too flexible. That's right, being too flexible. When you work remotely, oftentimes the first thing to go are your personal boundaries, because you're trying to be productive, you're trying to be effective, yet you're also in a different environment where distractions and interruptions abound. For example, if you're in a coffee shop, maybe you're being interrupted or distracted by the barista or friends that walk in, and you're allowing yourself to be productive. In fact, when I was writing my first book, I often worked in a coffee shop. When I first was there, I noticed that people would come in that I would know, and I would stop and talk to them, and I was constantly getting interrupted. So what I started to do was I started putting earbuds in. Even if I wasn't actually listening to anything, it just let people know, hey, Ben's in the zone right now, please don't interrupt him. And that helped a good deal. If you're working in your home office, man, there are lots of interruptions and distractions. You might even become the errand person for your family. Perhaps you constantly or frequently or periodically have people come work on the house while you're there, like you're always available and you're letting yourself be interrupted. And this just really is a huge catastrophic mistake when it comes to working remotely. It's not treating your schedule with priority and just letting so many things interrupt you. So the key is to put up micro barriers around your time. Schedule time blocks where you're not letting yourself be interrupted. Even if the painter's coming to the house later or the washing machine repair person's coming later, block off time before they arrive and say, hey, even if they call and say, hey, I can come early, instead of flexing your schedule, treat your schedule with respect and block that time to where you can truly be productive remotely. I just notice and just create a little list. Take a sticky note and write distractions/interruptions across the top and just notice the ones that pop up throughout your day. And just by noticing these patterns, what you can do then is to start to circle one or two and then try to erect some barriers around those to prevent them from interrupting your workflow. And you'll notice how much more effective you can be. The third big mistake is working in isolation. When you're working in isolation remotely, you can, as an individual, become more productive. And in fact, a lot of people who do work in isolation are more productive because they often do have less interruptions, interactions, are able to create more of a bubble to work in. However, working in isolation is actually a big mistake because you need to be collaborative, right? The magnitude and the value that you add often in most people's roles isn't able to really blossom in isolation. You need to interact with other people. Oftentimes people go remotely for the first time, they do notice a big spike in productivity, but over time, we have what we call, or what I like to call, the productivity slide. Your productivity begins to slide as you need to take on bigger projects that involve other people, other missions, other organizations and clients where you need to reach out, and to grow your business or grow your career, you need the support of others. And so working in isolation when you're remote is a big mistake. So the key is to nurture your network, to periodically, proactively reach out to collaborators, reach out to clients, get feedback, invite them to interact with you. Because as John Hayward, who's from the 1500s, said, out of sight, out of mind. You probably heard this message in your career. When you're working remotely, that's the danger, is out of sight, out of mind. If people don't see you because you're not in the office, they often forget about you. And instead of committing catastrophic mistake number one, which is sending emails to let people you'll know around, focus on interacting with them and adding value in your communication, whether it be verbal or email or instant message. There's a bonus mistake here that comes up time and time again. Big mistake is assuming you'll be productive. I recently had a client who works in an office. He said to me, Ben, on Friday, I'm gonna knock out all these different things because I'm gonna be working from my home office without distraction or interruption. But guess what? Friday came around, he's in his office, he's all ready to get to work, and then the emails started coming in abundance. And he began to react and reply to all of those emails, all the things he had on his to-do list that were so important and so impactful for him to work on began to just go down and down and down the to-do list. And then the end of the day came on Friday and he hadn't done any of them. That's right, he hadn't done any of those. And he was really frustrated. He felt like his day in his home office, working remotely, had been wasted. So when you're working remotely, it's important to plan more, not less, than when you're in the office. You do that by, number one, clarifying at the beginning of the day what your high impact priority is, whether that's to plan a budget or work on a strategy or presentation or analysis, or maybe it's something even related to some important communications that you need to send out. And it even could be email, but you're sending versus waiting on replies. And so the key in there is to block out time. So when you're working remotely, block time to execute your high priority. Now you may say, Ben, that can work in the office. And my answer to that is absolutely, it can and should work in the office. But when you're at home, there often are less constraints to work with. And so by giving yourself some time blocking constraints, you can increase your productivity and your effectiveness. So your next step is to avoid at least one of these big mistakes from working remotely. You may already be working remotely or you're considering working remotely soon, and just make a mental note of these big mistakes that we talked about today. And if you avoid one, it will indeed increase your productivity. So let's quickly review. Number one is sending emails to look productive. You don't need to look productive. Be productive by sending fewer emails with more intention and more value. Number two is being too flexible and giving in to distraction and interruption. Number three is working in isolation. May help your productivity in the short run, but you need collaboration and a proactive communication strategy to maintain effectiveness and productivity over the long haul. And the bonus is making the assumption that you will be productive just because you're working remotely. However, in the case study that I mentioned, and probably in your day, you know that prioritizing your most important task and creating constraints and a framework to accomplish that in your day and establishing those boundaries is a surefire way to increase your productivity and effectiveness. If you really want to accelerate your results and your productivity, make sure to stick around for the next video.